A lawyer wanted to test Jesus. So he asked him one day, "What must I do to inherit eternal life?" Jesus answered, "Well, you know the law. Love God with all your heart and love your neighbor as yourself." The lawyer, as lawyers are often inclined to do, then asked a follow-up question: "Who exactly is my neighbor?" Jesus, as he was often inclined to do, replied with a story. A Jewish man was traveling when he was attacked by robbers and left for dead. As he was lying there dying, a priest eventually happened to pass his way. When he looked down and saw the dying man, the priest kept on walking. Then a man from the tribe of Levi, a group known for their piety, also came along. When he saw the dying man, he actually went to the other side of the road to pass by. But then came a Samaritan. You know those Samaritans, they don't really get along with Jewish folks. And when the Samaritan saw the dying Jewish man, he went to him, put the man on his own donkey, and then brought him to an inn where he took care of him, and then paid the innkeeper to continue to take care of the man until he was well enough to leave. The story complete, Jesus asked the lawyer, which of those three was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of the robbers? The lawyer replied, the one who had mercy on him. Jesus replied, go and do likewise. Today is the 6th installment of our sermon series on UUCJ's spoken affirmation. Each week, we have been examining one line from our congregation's affirmation, the one that we recite together at the end of every service. Today, we will consider what it means to serve humanity in fellowship. You know, over these past 6 weeks, as we have analyzed the words of this spoken affirmation together, we have together studied and considered and reflected on several powerful words. Words like love, truth, sacrament, prayer, peace, freedom. But of all the powerful words that we have studied in this affirmation, and of all the powerful words we still have yet to study, only one word appears twice. The only significant word to appear twice in our affirmation is the word service, or its derivative, serve. And I don't believe that's a coincidence. I don't believe that's an accident. There's a reason why that word appears twice, and it's the same reason the word service also appears in our mission statement. As powerful and important as love and peace and freedom are to this body of people here at UUCJ, service is most important. Don't get me wrong, love is a great thing. In fact, according to our affirmation, love is the doctrine of this church. And if you recall from our first sermon in this series, we all learned that the word doctrine is just a fancy Latin term for teaching. And love is certainly a great teaching. It's a great thing to teach, an even better thing if you can learn it. But if that's all that love is, then it simply is not enough. If our spoken affirmation ended after that first line, if the only thing we recited at the end of every service were the words, love is the doctrine of this church, then frankly, I might not be a member here. And I suspect many of you wouldn't be members here because it's not good enough. Love has to be more than just a teaching. I was taught trigonometry in high school. It was a teaching, and I learned it. I learned it good. I got an A. But have I ever used trigonometry in my life? I can't even remember what a cosine is. In fact, when I tried to type the word cosine into this sermon, like Bill Gates gave me a little red squiggly line to tell me you missed it. Love is a fine teaching, but so is trigonometry. And as important as love is, service is more important because service is love in action. Service is like a magic box that transforms the abstraction of love into something concrete. Service is what allows others to see, to hear, and to feel our love. Now, the word service itself is connected in Latin to the root word for slave, and in some ways I like that. In some ways it's appropriate because it reminds us that service requires humility. Service is not glamorous. It's not sexy. It's doing the kind of work that nobody else wants to do, the kind of work that does not lend itself to any kind of recognition or any kind of reward. Slaves don't work for any kind of remuneration. Likewise, our service is done not for some reward in the hereafter. I believe, like many of you, that good deeds are their own reward. So on one hand, connecting service to the idea of servanthood, it makes some sense, but the service we're talking about in this morning's context, it differs in at least one important aspect. You see, slaves have no choice to do their service, but we do. We have that freedom of choice. And the fact that through acts of service, we choose to sacrifice our time, our money, our sweat for the good of others, that's what imbues service with worth and value. That's what makes service the truest expression of love. So service is good. Yay, service, right? We pledge to try to do it every week, but to whom do we offer this service and how shall we do it? According to our affirmation, we serve humanity. That's kind of a frighteningly huge job when you think about it. I guess on the bright side, it provides us with a very big target, very difficult to miss. But you know, I don't think the inclusion of the word humanity here is rhetorical, poetic hyperbole. It serves a function. It reminds us that our loving and compassionate service is not merely to one another here within our church walls. Our service is to all. Now, we are all about creating the beloved community here in our midst, and that is certainly a noble goal. We should not stop striving to dwell together in peace as a spiritual community. And that would require that we serve each other, and we should do that. But that, again, is not enough. It is not sufficient. Just as it is not sufficient for love to be an abstract teaching, it is not sufficient that we merely serve each other within this community. Our service must extend beyond our church walls. Otherwise, we are all liars, lying every week when we hold each other's hands and recite this affirmation. Maggie Lovins, UUA Southern Region Congregational Life Staff member, was recently at our church doing a startup, and she made a pretty striking comment, one that cuts against a certain frame of mind, a certain way of thinking, one that I myself often use. She stated in unequivocal terms that we should not allow ourselves to think of ourselves as an island. Our spiritual home here is not a liberal oasis in the middle of conservative Northeast Florida. It's a tempting mode of thought. But if truly believed and lived, it completely disconnects us from the people out there, the humanity that surrounds us. We have an obligation to serve them as well. Why? Because our love is big enough for everyone. Do you believe that? Our love is big enough for everyone, not just the chosen few who share our way of thinking or who share our values. It's easy to love and serve people you like, people who are similar to you. It's much harder to love and serve the people in whom you don't see much of yourself. Now, of course, only loving people in whom you see a bit of yourself, that's actually a form of narcissism. But that's a sermon for another time. We are an interconnected web, and our common humanity connects all of us, whether black or white, male or female, gay or straight, rich or poor, old or young, Republican or Democrat, Christian or atheist, Southerner or Yankee, Seminole or Gator. It doesn't matter. At our core, we are one. We Unitarian Universalists, yes, we do recognize our differences and we celebrate our diversity, but let us also celebrate and recognize all of our commonalities. We are all part of the same human family. Our physical bodies are all comprised of the same stardust. We are all children of God. And as we serve one another, we pledge to do so in a spirit of fellowship. Now, the very first definition on dictionary.com of the word fellowship is the condition or relation of being a fellow. This is the most useless definition of any word I've ever heard. Don't use dictionary.com. So I looked around at a few other definitions. I studied the etymology of the word. Frankly, nothing magical. It's pretty straightforward. Fellowship is companionship, comradeship, being together in unity. Incredibly simple definition, incredibly difficult to put into practice. How do we find fellowship with all of humanity? It's hard because, each one of us, we each belong to a group. Most of us belong to several groups, actually. For example, I'm a member of this church. We're a group. I'm also a member of the University of Kansas Alumni Association. That's a group. I'm clergy within iCare. iCare is a group. I'm a man. Men are a group. Now, there's nothing wrong with groups. Groups are useful, and they're inevitable. But the inherent problem that arises with groups is that to be part of a group means that there are people, human beings, who must also exist outside that group. The creation of any group automatically creates this nebulous conglomeration of other people and ideas and values outside of your group known as the other. So long as any group exists, the other will also always exist. It's like our own shadow. So we may as well learn to get along with it. It's hard. I know it's hard, right? Because the other is stupid, right? They have to be. If they weren't, they'd be us. They're inferior. Whoever we are in this group, we, whatever that is, we're awesome. Them? Losers. Total losers. They're always wrong. What's up with that? It's like they can't do a single thing right. We can't be in fellowship with them. The only way we can be in fellowship with them is if they completely change and become us. That's just how it has to be. Now, that was a bit over the top. But even the most open-minded among us here has probably tripped into that fundamentalistic mind frame once or twice in our lifetimes. I know I have. Learning to live in fellowship with humanity requires being able to see the good, the essentially human in everyone. And our faith compels us to believe that inherent good, that inherent worth and dignity, it is there somewhere in everyone. Even when we can't always see it, we choose to believe it until we can see it. Last Sunday, I assigned us all some homework designed to help us all see each other a little bit better, especially people we don't have much in common with. I basically asked you to purposely expose yourself to various expressions of other cultures. Out of curiosity, how many people did the homework? We got a few hands. Good, thank you. Obviously not a good teacher if I can't get more than 5% of the congregation to do the homework, but I get that. It's okay. One of the things I did for the homework was I forced myself to listen to a talk radio program about NASCAR racing. It's not that I hate NASCAR racing. I just can't understand it at all. It literally makes no sense to me. I don't understand why people would want to spend hours watching cars go in a circle over and over. It just seems like a waste of gas to me. So I stumbled upon this radio talk show about NASCAR, remembered the homework, got to lead by example, so I listened. I lucked out. The hosts of the show were talking about Dale Earnhardt Sr. Now, I'm not a NASCAR fan, we've established that, but even I know who Dale Earnhardt Sr. was. He was a legend in the sport, a personality that transcended the sport. For those who don't know, Dale Earnhardt tragically died in 2001 while racing in the Daytona 500. The hosts of the radio show both personally knew Dale, and they were sharing some stories about him in tribute, but they weren't racing stories. One of the hosts told the story of how, as a young man, his mother unexpectedly passed away. While the grief was still fresh in his heart, he happened to run into Dale. Now, Dale had a reputation for being a rather aggressive, no-nonsense kind of man. His nickname, for those who know, was the Intimidator. But here, at this time, Dale put his hands gently on the young man, and he offered him words of consolation. Dale shared with him about the loss of his own father. And from that shared experience, Dale humbly offered his own wisdom. He told the young man he would never get over this. The pain would stay with him forever, but he would get through it. Decades later, those words of comfort and compassion still mean the world to the young man to whom they were spoken. Never in my life did I think that I would ever tear up listening to a talk radio show about NASCAR. But I did, because this particular broadcast wasn't about race cars and race car drivers. It was about people. It was about people being human beings, sharing the common human experience of loss and grief. Listening to that story, I almost cried because I have been that young man. And I've been Dale Earnhardt. And so has each and every one of us. Now, if you haven't, I can tell you this: you will. I promise. Someday you will. I think the more we understand what it really means to be human, the more easily we see the humanity in each other, even in those we consider the other. Well, therein lies the path to true fellowship. Jesus' parable of the Good Samaritan may be the most important story he ever gave us. In a deeply divided world that continues to polarize and cannibalize itself, Jesus' story reminds us that despite our apparent differences, we are all neighbors on this tiny little blue planet we call Earth. The Samaritan understood this. He loved and served his neighbor. This morning, I echo to you the charge given by Jesus to that lawyer: go and do likewise. Blessed be.